The doors of the great hall slammed shut behind Elena before she even understood why she had been summoned. Every eye in the room turned toward her, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any shout. Alpha Damien sat on his raised chair at the far end of the hall, his fingers pressed together, his expression unreadable. Elena's heart began to pound. She had served this pack faithfully for years, carrying messages, healing the wounded, standing guard through storms and danger. She expected praise. She expected a reward. What she felt instead was fear, crawling up her spine like cold water. "You wanted to see me, Alpha," she said, keeping her voice steady even though her hands trembled at her sides. Damien studied her for a long moment before he spoke. "I have decided your future, Elena. Your family owes this pack a debt that has gone unpaid for 3 generations. Tonight, that debt will be settled." Elena's stomach dropped. She had heard whispers about her family's old debt, but no one had ever spoken of it so plainly, so coldly, in front of the entire pack. "What do you mean, Alpha?" "You will marry my brother," Damien said. "Kale." For a moment, Elena thought she had misheard him. The name Kale had not been spoken openly in this hall for over a year. He was the brother who had once stood beside Damien as a powerful alpha in his own right, until accusations of betrayal stripped him of his rank, his home, and his place among the pack. He had been sent away to the edge of the territory, left to survive alone in a broken cabin that most pack members pretended did not exist. People spoke his name only in secret, and always with disgust or pity. "Kale," Elena repeated, barely above a whisper. "The one they say tried to overthrow you?" "The very same," Damien answered, his tone flat, as if he were discussing the weather rather than her entire future. "He needs a wife who will keep him quiet and keep him out of trouble. You need a way to erase your family's shame. This arrangement benefits us both." Murmurs spread through the hall, some pack members exchanging glances, others looking away as if embarrassed for her. Elena searched the faces around her, hoping someone would object, hoping someone would say this was wrong. No one did. In this pack, no one challenged the Alpha's word, not even when it meant handing a woman's entire life over like a piece of property. "Alpha, please," Elena said, stepping forward despite the warning look from the guard beside her. "I have served this pack with everything I have. I have never once failed you. Is there no other way to settle this debt?" Damien's eyes narrowed slightly, though his voice remained calm. "There is no other way. The decision has already been made. You leave for the eastern border cabin tomorrow at sunrise. The ceremony will take place there, quiet and quick. No celebration, no feast. This is not that kind of marriage." The words landed on her like a physical blow. She wanted to scream, to run, to demand a different fate, but she understood the reality of her position too well. Refusing the Alpha's order meant exile, or worse. Her family would suffer for her defiance, and she could not allow that. She lowered her head, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. "As you command, Alpha," she said quietly. Damien gave a short nod, already looking past her toward the next matter on his list, as if her entire future had simply been filed away and forgotten. Elena turned and walked out of the hall, her legs feeling as though they belonged to someone else. The cold night air hit her face the moment she stepped outside, and for the first time since she had been called into that hall, she allowed herself to breathe. But the relief did not last. Tomorrow she would be married to a man she had never met, a man everyone feared, a man everyone believed was dangerous and broken beyond repair. That night, sleep refused to come. Elena sat by her small window, staring out at the dark line of trees that marked the edge of the territory, somewhere beyond which Kale's cabin stood in isolation. She thought about the stories she had heard over the years. Some said Kale had tried to kill his own brother to seize power. Others said he had turned his back on the pack entirely, working with outsiders to bring the whole territory to ruin. She did not know which version, if any, was true. All she knew was that tomorrow she would be bound to him for the rest of her life, whether she wanted it or not. When morning came, Elena dressed in silence. There was no wedding gown waiting for her, no flowers, no music. Instead, a plain gray dress lay across her bed, left there by one of Damien's attendants the night before, along with a short note that read only, "Wear this. Be ready by sunrise." She stared at the dress for a long time before finally putting it on. It fit her poorly, too loose in some places, and too tight in others, as if no one had bothered to consider her comfort at all. A small group of guards escorted her out of the village and into the forest, walking in complete silence the entire way. The journey to the eastern border took nearly 2 hours, winding through thick trees and rocky paths that grew more uneven the farther they traveled. Elena had never gone this deep into pack territory before. It was as if this part of the land had been deliberately forgotten, left to grow wild and untended, a fitting place to hide a man the pack wanted to erase. When the cabin finally came into view, Elena felt her breath catch. It was smaller than she expected, its wooden walls weathered and cracked, its roof patched unevenly in several places. Smoke rose faintly from a narrow chimney, the only sign that anyone lived there at all. The guard stopped at the edge of a small clearing and gestured for her to continue alone. "He knows you're coming," one of the guards said, his voice carrying no warmth. "Go on." Elena hesitated for only a moment before forcing her feet forward. Each step felt heavier than the last. She reached the cabin door and raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open on its own. Standing in the doorway was a man unlike anyone she had imagined. He was tall, with broad shoulders that still carried the unmistakable strength of someone who had once commanded respect from an entire pack. His dark hair was longer than most alphas wore it, falling messily around a face marked by a thin scar near his jaw. His eyes, though, were what caught her attention most. They were sharp, guarded, and filled with a quiet exhaustion that spoke of far more suffering than anyone in the village ever whispered about. "You must be the bride my brother sent," Cale said, his voice low and rough, as though he rarely used it anymore. There was no warmth in his tone, only a tired kind of bitterness. "My name is Elena," she said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "I know who you are," Cale replied. "Everyone in this territory knows who gets sent to the edge of nowhere to marry the disgraced Alpha. Come inside before the guards decide to report that I made you stand outside too long." Elena stepped past him into the cabin, and the door closed behind her with a heavy, final sound. Inside, the space was sparse but not entirely without care. A small fire burned in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. A single table sat near the center of the room, along with 2 chairs, one clearly newer than the other, as if it had been added recently in preparation for her arrival. The air smelled of pine and smoke, and beneath that, something colder, like isolation itself had seeped into the wood over time. "I won't pretend this is anything other than what it is," Cale said, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "My brother sent you here to settle a debt, not because he cares whether either of us is happy. I don't expect anything from you, Elena. Stay out of my way, and I'll stay out of yours. That's the best arrangement I can offer." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any sign of the dangerous traitor the pack whispered about. What she saw instead was a man who looked as though he had been carrying an unbearable weight for far too long, someone who had learned to expect nothing but disappointment from the world around him. "I didn't ask to be here either," Elena said quietly, "but since we're both stuck with this arrangement, maybe we don't have to make it worse than it already is." Cale's eyes flickered with something unreadable, perhaps surprise, perhaps suspicion. "You don't know anything about me," he said. "Everyone who claims to know me only knows the lies my brother spread. Trust me, it's better if you keep your distance. I'm not someone worth getting close to." Before Elena could respond, a knock sounded at the door, sharp and official. Cale's entire posture shifted instantly, his shoulders tensing, his jaw tightening. He crossed the room and opened the door to reveal one of Damien's senior guards, a tall man named Garrick, standing with a folded piece of parchment in his hand. "The Alpha sends his instructions," Garrick said, holding out the parchment without stepping inside. "The marriage ceremony will take place now, witnessed only by myself and one other. No celebration, no pack gathering. Once it's done, I'll report back that the debt has been settled." Cale took the parchment without a word, his expression darkening as he read it. Elena watched his hand tighten around the paper until his knuckles turned pale. Whatever pain this moment caused him, he buried it quickly beneath a mask of practiced indifference. "Let's get this over with," Cale muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. The ceremony that followed was nothing like anything Elena had ever imagined for her own wedding day. There were no flowers, no songs, no gathered friends or family to celebrate the joining of two lives. Garrick recited the required words in a flat, bored tone, and a second witness, an older woman Elena did not recognize, stood silently near the door with her arms folded, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. When it was over, Garrick simply nodded, turned, and left without another word, leaving Elena and Cale alone in the cabin, as husband and wife in name only. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Elena stood near the table, unsure of what to do or say, while Cale remained by the door, staring out at the darkening forest beyond. "You should take the back room," he finally said, his voice quiet. "I'll stay out here by the fire. We don't have to pretend this is anything more than what it is." Elena nodded, grateful for the small mercy of distance, though something inside her ached at the coldness of it all. She walked toward the narrow back room, but paused at the doorway, glancing back at him one last time. He stood with his back to her, his shoulders rigid, staring into the flames, as though searching for something long lost within them. "For what it's worth," Elena said softly, "I don't believe everything they say about you." Cale did not turn around, but his shoulders seemed to loosen just slightly at her words. "You will," he said quietly. "Everyone eventually does." Elena closed the door behind her, sinking onto the narrow bed inside the small room. Outside, she could hear the wind picking up, rattling against the old wooden walls of the cabin that was now, somehow, her home. She stared up at the cracked ceiling above her, her mind spinning with everything that had happened in the span of a single day. She had gone from a loyal pack member with no particular importance to the wife of the most feared and hated man in the entire territory, a man everyone believed was dangerous, broken beyond saving. But as she lay there in the darkness, replaying the brief flicker of vulnerability she had seen in his eyes, a strange thought settled over her, one she did not fully understand yet. Whatever Cale truly was, whatever he had done or not done to earn his exile, she sensed there was far more to his story than the pack had ever allowed anyone to hear. And somewhere beneath the fear and uncertainty of everything that had just happened to her, a quiet spark of determination began to grow. She did not yet know what it meant, only that tomorrow, she intended to start finding out the truth for herself. Elena woke before dawn to the sound of something heavy crashing outside the cabin. Her heart jumped instantly to alarm, and she sat upright in the narrow bed, listening hard through the thin wooden wall. There were no more sounds after that, only the low whistle of wind through the trees. Still, her instincts told her something was wrong, and she pushed herself out of bed, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders as she crept toward the main room. The front door stood open, letting in the gray light of early morning. Cale was nowhere inside. Elena stepped out onto the small porch, scanning the clearing until she spotted him near the tree line, kneeling over something on the ground. She moved closer, her bare feet cold against the damp earth, and realized he was tending to an injured young man who lay motionless in the dirt. "Don't just stand there," Cale said without looking up, his voice sharp with urgency. "Get water and clean cloth from inside, quickly." Elena did not hesitate. She rushed back into the cabin, found a cloth and a small bowl, filled it from the water barrel near the hearth, and hurried back outside. Kneeling beside Cale, she got her first close look at the injured man. He was young, barely more than a boy, with deep scratches along his arm and a bruise darkening across his temple. His breathing was shallow but steady. "Who is he?" Elena asked, handing Cale the cloth. "His name is Toby," Cale said, pressing the damp cloth carefully against the boy's wounds. "He's an Omega from the northern edge of the pack. Low rank, no protection. Some of the higher-ranked wolves think that gives them the right to treat him however they please." Elena's stomach turned as she understood his meaning. Someone did this to him on purpose? Cale's jaw tightened. 3 of Damien's favored guards cornered him near the river last night. I heard him crying out and got there before it went any further, but not soon enough to stop the damage completely. He worked with careful, practiced hands, cleaning the wound with a gentleness that surprised Elena. This was not the reckless, dangerous man the pack had described to her. This was someone who moved with quiet purpose, someone who clearly cared, even if he tried hard not to show it. Why doesn't anyone stop them? Elena asked. Why would guards attack someone with no power to fight back? Because cruelty is easier when no one holds you accountable, Kale said flatly. And because everyone in this territory has learned that questioning my brother's chosen men only brings trouble down on themselves. I would know better than anyone. They worked together in silence for several minutes, cleaning and wrapping Toby's wounds until his breathing steadied further and color slowly returned to his face. When it was clear he was stable enough to move, Kale lifted him carefully and carried him inside the cabin, laying him gently on the very bed Elena had slept in the night before. He can rest here until he's strong enough to return home, Kale said, straightening up and finally meeting Elena's eyes. I would appreciate it if you didn't mention this to anyone. If word gets back to Damien that I interfered with his guards, it could go badly, not just for me, but for Toby as well. I won't say anything, Elena promised. But Kale, this isn't right. Someone should answer for what happened to him. In this pack, only my brother decides who answers for anything, Kale said, a flicker of old anger crossing his face before he masked it again. I learned that lesson the hard way. Elena wanted to ask more, wanted to understand exactly what had happened to strip this clearly capable, clearly caring man of his title and his home, but something in his expression told her now was not the time. Instead, she busied herself preparing a simple breakfast from the limited supplies in the cabin, while Kale sat beside Toby, watching over him with quiet vigilance. Over the following days, Elena began to notice small things about her new husband that did not match the stories she had grown up hearing. When a fierce storm rolled through the territory, Kale spent hours outside, reinforcing the roof of the cabin, not just for himself, but making sure the small shelter where Toby now stayed to recover remained dry and secure. When their food supplies ran low, Kale ventured deep into the forest alone and returned hours later with enough game to last them both nearly 2 weeks, never once complaining about the effort it clearly cost him. He rarely spoke about himself, and whenever Elena tried to steer their conversations toward his past, toward the accusations that had led to his exile, he would grow quiet, his expression closing off like a door slamming shut. Still, Elena found herself paying closer attention, piecing together small details from his careful, guarded words. One evening, as they sat near the fire while Toby slept soundly in the next room, Elena finally worked up the courage to ask directly. Kale, what really happened between you and your brother? Everyone in the pack says you tried to overthrow him, that you worked with outsiders to bring down the territory. But that's not the man I've seen since I arrived here. Kale stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. People believe what they're told to believe, especially when the one doing the telling holds all the power, he said quietly. I was the older brother. Our father intended for me to lead the pack, not Damien. When our father died unexpectedly, there were those who questioned whether Damien was truly ready for that kind of responsibility. I never said a word against him publicly. I supported his claim to leadership, even though many pack members quietly wished otherwise. Then why were you accused of betrayal? Elena asked. Because supporting him publicly wasn't enough to erase the doubts some pack members still carried, Kale continued, his voice growing tighter. Damien saw those doubts as a threat, even though I never encouraged them. When a group of dissatisfied wolves attempted an uprising against his early leadership, he needed someone to blame, someone whose punishment would silence any remaining questions about his right to rule. I was the easiest target. My own brother stood in front of the entire pack and accused me of secretly organizing that uprising myself. Elena's chest tightened at the pain evident in his voice, carefully controlled though it was. Did you have any way to prove your innocence? I tried, Kale said, his hands tightening into fists on his knees. But Damien controlled which witnesses were allowed to speak, which evidence was considered, which voices mattered in that hall. By the time the so-called trial ended, I had already lost everything. My title, my home, my place among my own people. I was fortunate he allowed me to live at all, exiled to this forgotten corner of the territory instead. That's not justice, Elena said quietly. That's just cruelty, dressed up to look official. Kale finally looked at her, something shifting behind his tired eyes. You're the first person outside this cabin to say that out loud in over a year. The following morning, Toby was strong enough to attempt the journey back toward the northern edge of the pack. Though he lingered near the cabin door, clearly reluctant to leave the first place he had felt truly safe in a long time. "Thank you," Toby said quietly to Kale, his voice still weak but sincere. "No one else would have stopped to help me. Everyone else just looks away." "You don't owe me anything," Kale replied, placing a firm but gentle hand on the young Omega's shoulder. "Just stay careful. And if you ever find yourself in trouble again, you know where to find me, even if I can't offer much beyond these walls." After Toby departed, Elena found herself watching Kale more closely than ever, her earlier fear slowly transforming into something far more complicated. She began to understand that his exile had not stripped away his sense of honor or his instinct to protect the vulnerable, even at great personal risk to himself. If anything, it seemed to have deepened those qualities, forcing him to act from genuine conviction, rather than the expectation of reward or recognition. That afternoon, while Kale was out repairing a section of fence near the edge of the property, Elena took the opportunity to explore the cabin more thoroughly. In a small wooden chest, tucked beneath a loose floorboard in the corner of the main room, she discovered a collection of old letters, their edges worn soft from repeated handling. Curiosity outweighed her hesitation, and she carefully opened the top letter, her eyes scanning the faded handwriting. The letter was addressed to Kale from someone named Corwin, a pack member Elena did not recognize, dated shortly before the accusations against Kale had surfaced. The words within described growing unrest among certain pack members regarding Damien's leadership, along with a warning that someone intended to use that unrest to frame an innocent party for the coming uprising. The letter ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted before finishing his thought. Elena's pulse quickened as she carefully returned the letter to its place, her mind racing with the implications. If this letter was genuine, it suggested Kale had known trouble was coming, that someone had specifically planned to frame him before the actual uprising even occurred. But if he had known, why hadn't he been able to protect himself when the accusations finally came? She heard the front door creak open and quickly closed the chest, sliding the floorboard back into place just as Kale stepped inside, sweat glistening on his brow from his work outside. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Kale remarked, studying her expression carefully. "I'm fine," Elena said quickly, perhaps too quickly, judging by the slight narrowing of his eyes. "Just thinking about everything that's happened since I arrived here." Kale studied her a moment longer before letting the matter drop, though Elena sensed he did not entirely believe her simple explanation. As the days continued to pass, Elena found herself growing more determined than ever to uncover the full truth behind Kale's exile, though she remained careful not to reveal what she had discovered until she understood far more about who this mysterious Corwin was, and what role, if any, he might still play in the tangled web of lies that had stolen Kale's rightful place among his people. That night, as she lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling above her, Elena made a silent promise to herself. Whatever it took, however long it required, she intended to help Kale reclaim the truth the pack had stolen from him, even if doing so meant standing directly against the very Alpha who had sent her here in the first place. A sharp knock echoed against the cabin door before the sun had fully risen, and Elena felt her stomach twist at the sound. Visitors rarely came to this forgotten corner of the territory, and unexpected visitors almost never meant good news. Kale was already moving toward the door before she could speak, his body tense, every instinct alert. Standing outside was Garrick again, flanked by two younger guards Elena did not recognize. His expression carried none of the flat boredom from the wedding ceremony. This time, his eyes were sharp with suspicion. "The Alpha wants to know why one of his guards returned last week, with a story about an Omega who disappeared from the northern camp," Garrick said, his gaze flicking between Kale and Elena. "A boy named Toby. Word reached us that he was seen walking away from this direction." Elena felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her face carefully neutral, remembering her promise to Kale. "I haven't seen any Omega," Kale said calmly, leaning against the doorframe with practiced indifference. "As you can see, it's just my wife and myself out here. Unless you'd like to search the cabin yourselves." Garrick studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment before finally shaking his head. "The Alpha simply wants reassurance that nothing improper is happening out here. Given your history, he tends to worry." "Tell my brother his concern is touching," Kale replied dryly, though entirely unnecessary. The guards eventually turned and left, disappearing back into the trees, but the tension in the cabin did not ease once the door closed. Elena watched Cale carefully as he moved back toward the fire, his shoulders rigid with restrained frustration. "They're watching us," Elena said quietly. "Watching you, specifically." "They always have been," Cale replied. "Ever since I was exiled, my brother has kept eyes on this cabin. He doesn't trust that I'll simply fade away quietly, no matter how much he wishes I would." Elena hesitated only a moment before deciding it was finally time to tell him what she had discovered. "Cale, there's something I need to show you. I found it while you were repairing the fence a few days ago." She led him to the small wooden chest hidden beneath the loose floorboard, watching his face carefully as she lifted the lid to reveal the collection of old letters inside. Recognition flickered across his features, followed quickly by something far more guarded. "You went through my things," he said, his voice quiet, but not entirely without hurt. "I'm sorry," Elena said honestly. "I shouldn't have looked without asking." "But Cale, I read one of these letters, the one from someone named Corwin, warning you that someone intended to frame you for an uprising before it even happened. If that letter is real, it means someone planned your downfall in advance. That's not the same story the pack has always told." Cale was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the chest as though seeing it for the first time in years. "Corwin was a friend of mine," he finally said, one of the few pack members who never bought into Damien's version of events. "He tried to warn me that certain wolves were growing restless, that they intended to stage some kind of rebellion. He believed someone close to Damien planned to use that unrest as an excuse to eliminate any rival to the throne, myself included. Then why didn't you use his warning to defend yourself when the accusations came?" Elena asked. Cale's expression darkened. "Because Corwin disappeared before the trial ever took place. No one has heard from him since. Some said he left the territory entirely out of fear. Others whispered that he simply vanished, the way inconvenient witnesses sometimes do when they know too much." A cold chill settled over Elena as the full weight of his words sank in. "You think something happened to him, something to keep him from testifying on your behalf." "I think a lot of things," Cale said, his voice tight with old grief and anger tangled together. "But thinking something and proving it are very different matters, especially when the only person who might confirm the truth has vanished without a trace." Elena's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of information into something resembling a plan. What if he's still alive somewhere? What if we could find him, or at least find someone who knows what really happened to him? "Elena," Cale said, his tone carrying a warning edge, "even considering such a thing puts you at risk. If my brother suspects for even a moment that we're trying to dig up the truth behind my exile, he won't hesitate to punish both of us." "I'm not afraid of him," Elena said, surprising herself with the conviction in her own voice. "I've watched you these past weeks, Cale. I've seen the man you actually are, not the monster everyone in the village whispers about. You don't deserve this. Whatever it takes, I want to help you get your life back." Cale studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his tired eyes, a flicker of hope he clearly hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time. "Why would you risk yourself for someone you barely know?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Elena said simply, "and because somewhere along the way these past weeks, I stopped seeing you as a stranger I was forced to marry, and started seeing you as someone worth fighting for." The words hung between them, heavier than either of them had expected. Cale's guarded expression softened slightly, though he quickly masked it, unwilling or unable to fully trust the warmth spreading through his chest. "If we're going to search for answers," he finally said, "we need to be careful. My brother has eyes and ears throughout this entire territory. One wrong move, and we could both lose far more than we already have." Over the following days, Elena and Cale began quietly gathering information, careful never to ask direct questions that might draw unwanted attention. Elena used her old connections within the village, casual conversations with pack members she had known for years, gently steering discussions toward the old uprising and the mysterious disappearance of Corwin. Most people either knew nothing useful or refused to discuss the topic at all, their expressions tightening with fear the moment his name was mentioned. It was during one such conversation, while Elena visited the village to trade for supplies, that she encountered an older woman named Mabel, who ran the small healing house near the center of the village. Mabel had always been kind to Elena in the past, and when Elena carefully brought up Corwin's name, something flickered across the old woman's face. "That's a name I haven't heard spoken aloud in a very long time," Mabel said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one else stood within earshot. "Corwin used to bring me herbs from the eastern forest before everything happened. Good man. Never had a cruel word for anyone. Do you know what happened to him?" Elena asked carefully. Mabel hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. "There are those who say he simply left the territory, frightened by the unrest surrounding the uprising. But I remember the night before he disappeared, he came to my healing house with a wound on his arm, claiming he'd been attacked by wolves in the forest. Except the wound didn't look like any wolf attack I'd ever treated before. It looked deliberate, controlled, like someone wanted to send him a warning." Elena's heart pounded as she absorbed this new information. "Did he say who attacked him?" "He wouldn't say," Mabel replied, "but he seemed terrified, more terrified than I'd ever seen him. He left that same night, and no one has heard from him since." The old woman paused, studying Elena with careful, searching eyes. "Why are you asking about this, child? These are dangerous waters to wade into." "I have my reasons," Elena said carefully. "Thank you, Mabel. This means more than you know." As Elena made her way back toward the eastern cabin, her mind buzzed with the implications of what she had just learned. If Corwin had been deliberately attacked and frightened into fleeing the territory, it strongly suggested someone had wanted him silenced before he could testify on Cale's behalf. The question now was who, and whether that person still held enough power within the pack to pose a continued threat to anyone who dared investigate further. When she returned to the cabin and shared what she had learned, Cale's expression grew increasingly grim. "If Corwin was deliberately silenced, that means my brother's hands may be even dirtier than I originally believed. It also means whoever helped orchestrate my downfall is still out there, likely still loyal to Damien, still capable of doing whatever it takes to keep the truth buried." "Then we need to find out who that person is," Elena said firmly. "And we need to find out if there's any way to locate Corwin, or discover what truly happened to him." Cale nodded slowly, a new determination settling into his features, one Elena had not seen since her arrival at the cabin weeks earlier. "For the first time in over a year," he said quietly, "I actually believe there might be a path back to the truth, and I have you to thank for that, Elena." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees surrounding the isolated cabin, carrying with it the unspoken promise of challenges still to come. But for the first time since her forced marriage began, Elena felt something other than fear settling over her. She felt purpose, sharp and unshakable. The certainty that whatever dangers lay ahead, she and Cale would face them together, piece by piece, until the truth that had been buried for so long finally saw the light of day once more. Weeks passed, and the cabin that once felt like a prison to Elena slowly began to feel like something closer to a home, though the danger surrounding them never fully faded. She woke each morning to the sound of Cale, already outside, training in the small clearing behind the cabin, pushing his body through exercises that had clearly once belonged to someone with far greater strength and discipline than the exiled man the pack believed him to be. One crisp morning, Elena stepped outside with 2 cups of warm tea and paused to watch him. His movements were precise despite months of isolation, though she noticed the way he favored his left side slightly, the way his breathing grew ragged faster than it likely once had. Whatever strength remained within him had been dulled by neglect and despair, but it had not disappeared entirely. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Elena said, handing him one of the cups as he finally paused to catch his breath. Cale accepted the tea gratefully, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Strength alone won't undo what my brother took from me," he said, "but I refuse to remain this weak forever. If we're going to find the truth about Corwin, if we're going to have any chance of standing against whatever my brother throws at us, I need to be ready." "Then let me help you," Elena said, surprising even herself with the offer. "I may not be a warrior, but I've learned a few things over the years, tending to injuries, understanding how the body heals and grows stronger. Together, we can rebuild what your exile stripped away." Cale studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing whether to accept her offer or continue pushing through his struggles alone, the way he had grown accustomed to doing since his downfall. Finally, something in his guarded expression softened. "All right," he said quietly. "Show me what you know." From that morning forward, their days took on a new rhythm. Elena helped him design a careful routine, gradually increasing the intensity of his training while paying close attention to old injuries that had never properly healed during his year of isolation. She prepared meals specifically designed to rebuild his strength, using knowledge she had gathered over years of caring for injured pack members. Slowly, gradually, Elena began to see changes in him. His movements grew more fluid, his breathing steadier, the haunted exhaustion in his eyes replaced increasingly by focused determination. But physical strength was only part of what Kale needed to reclaim. Elena noticed that he rarely allowed himself to access the deeper parts of his wolf, the instinctive power that should have come naturally to someone of his former rank. One evening, as they sat together near the fire after a particularly demanding day of training, she finally asked him about it directly.
"You hold back," Elena said carefully. "I've seen it during training. You never let yourself fully connect with your wolf. Why?"
Kale's expression grew distant, memories clearly surfacing that he had long tried to suppress. "The night my brother stripped me of my title, he ordered a suppression ritual performed against my will. It's meant to weaken the bond between an alpha and his wolf, as punishment for the worst offenses. I've spent the past year believing that bond was permanently broken." "But you don't actually know that for certain," Elena said gently. "Have you tried, truly tried, to reconnect with it since your exile began?" Kale was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flickering flames. "I was afraid to try," he finally admitted. "Afraid of confirming that everything my brother took from me was gone forever. It felt safer to simply accept the loss than to attempt reaching for something and finding nothing there." "Fear kept you from even trying," Elena said softly. "Kale, I don't believe your wolf is truly gone. I've seen glimpses of your strength, your instincts, even in these past weeks. What if the suppression ritual only weakened the bond, rather than destroying it completely? What if it simply needs time, patience, and genuine effort to heal?" Something shifted in Kale's expression, a flicker of cautious hope breaking through years of resignation. "You really believe that's possible?" "I believe you won't know unless you try," Elena said, "and I believe I'll be right here beside you, whatever happens." The following days brought a new dimension to their efforts. Each evening, after physical training concluded, Kale would sit quietly near the edge of the forest, attempting to reach inward toward the wolf he had convinced himself was permanently lost. Progress came slowly, painfully at first, small flickers of connection followed by long stretches of frustrating silence. Elena remained patient throughout, offering quiet encouragement without ever pushing him harder than he could bear. On the 11th evening of these attempts, something finally changed. Elena watched as Kale's entire body tensed, his breathing quickening, before a low, powerful growl rumbled from somewhere deep within his chest, a sound unlike anything she had heard from him before. His eyes flashed briefly with an intensity that spoke of buried strength finally stirring after a long, imposed slumber. "Kale," Elena whispered, watching in amazement as he opened his eyes, clearly shaken by what had just occurred. "I felt it," he said, his voice trembling slightly with disbelief and relief tangled together. "For the first time in over a year, I actually felt the connection. It's weak, fragile, but it's there. You were right, Elena. It was never truly gone." The breakthrough marked a turning point neither of them could ignore. Over the following weeks, Kale's connection to his wolf continued strengthening steadily, though the process remained gradual and required constant effort. Elena watched him transform before her eyes, not into the arrogant alpha the pack once feared he might become, but into someone rediscovering his own worth, his own strength, piece by careful piece. Word of their activities, however, did not remain entirely secret. One afternoon, while returning from another quiet visit to the village to gather information about Corwin's disappearance, Elena noticed a figure watching her from the tree line, someone who quickly disappeared into the shadows the moment she turned in their direction. Her instincts screamed that they had been followed, and the unsettling feeling stayed with her the entire journey back to the cabin. "Someone's been watching me," Elena told Kale the moment she arrived, breathless from hurrying the final stretch of the path. I saw them near the village, and I think they followed me part of the way back. Kale's expression turned instantly serious, his newly strengthening protective instincts flaring visibly. Did you get a good look at them? Not clearly enough to identify them, Elena admitted. But Kale, if my brother-in-law's people are watching me now too, that means our search for the truth is starting to attract exactly the kind of attention we were hoping to avoid. Then we need to move more carefully, Kale said, though his jaw set with determination rather than fear. But we can't stop now, Elena. Not when we're finally getting closer to understanding what really happened. We simply need to be smarter about how we proceed. That night, as they discussed their next steps by the flickering firelight, Elena found herself studying Kale with a new kind of appreciation, one that had grown steadily over the weeks they had spent together. He was no longer the broken, defeated man she had first met in this cabin, wary and closed off from the entire world. Slowly, carefully, he was becoming someone else entirely, someone rediscovering the strength and conviction that had once made him worthy of leadership in the eyes of so many pack members before his downfall. "Thank you," Kale said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "For believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself. I don't know how I would have found the courage to attempt reconnecting with my wolf without your encouragement." "You had the strength within you all along," Elena replied. "I simply reminded you it was still there, waiting to be found again." Kale reached over, his hand covering hers briefly, a small gesture that carried far more weight than either of them fully acknowledged aloud. "Whatever happens next, whatever dangers we uncover as we search for the truth, I want you to know that having you beside me has made all the difference. I don't think I could have found my way back to who I truly am without you." Elena felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words, a feeling she had not expected to develop toward the man she had been forced to marry under such painful circumstances. What had begun as an arrangement built entirely on obligation and fear had slowly transformed into something neither of them had anticipated, a genuine partnership built on trust, respect, and a shared determination to reclaim the life that had been so unjustly stolen from him. Outside, the wind continued its steady rhythm through the trees, carrying with it the quiet promise of challenges still ahead. But within the walls of that small, isolated cabin, something powerful had begun to take root, a connection strong enough to weather whatever storms still waited on the horizon, and a strength rebuilding itself steadily with each passing day. Elena moved quickly through the underbrush, her breath fogging in the cool morning air as she made her way toward a small trading post 2 territories away from the pack's borders. Word had reached her through Mabel that a traveling merchant named Finian sometimes carried news from distant packs, news that occasionally included whispers about wolves who had fled their homes under mysterious circumstances. It was a thin lead, but after weeks of searching without success, Elena refused to let any possibility go unexplored. The trading post was a modest collection of wooden stalls set up near a crossroads, bustling with merchants and travelers from territories Elena had never visited. She found Finian easily enough, a weathered man with kind eyes who dealt primarily in rare herbs and medicinal supplies. When she carefully brought up Corwin's name and description, something flickered across his face, recognition mixed with caution. "I might know something about a wolf matching that description," Finian said quietly, glancing around to ensure their conversation remained private. "A man came through here perhaps 8 months ago, badly shaken, refusing to speak much about where he'd come from, or why he was traveling alone. He mentioned once that he was heading toward the northern mountains, somewhere far from any pack territory where old enemies might find him." "Did he give any indication why he was so afraid?" Elena asked, her pulse quickening with cautious hope. "Only that he'd witnessed something he wasn't meant to see," Finian replied. "Something involving powerful people who wouldn't hesitate to silence him permanently if he ever spoke the truth aloud." Elena thanked Finian for his help and hurried back toward the cabin, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just learned. If Corwin truly had fled toward the northern mountains, finding him would require a journey far more dangerous and complicated than anything they had attempted so far, one that would take them well beyond the relative safety of their isolated cabin and directly into unfamiliar, potentially hostile territory. When she shared the news with Kale that evening, his expression grew contemplative, weighing the risks carefully. The northern mountains are wild territory, unclaimed by any established pack. Dangerous creatures roam freely there, and the terrain itself can be deadly for those unfamiliar with its paths. If Corwin truly fled there, it means he was desperate enough to risk everything, rather than remain within reach of whoever threatened him. Then we need to find him, Elena said firmly. He's the only person who can confirm what really happened before your exile. Without his testimony, we have nothing but suspicion and old letters that anyone could dismiss as fabricated. Kale nodded slowly, though concern remained evident in his tightened jaw. The journey would take several days each way, assuming we don't encounter serious trouble along the route. And leaving this cabin for an extended period risks drawing even more attention from my brother's watchers, particularly if they notice we've both disappeared simultaneously. Then we need a plan that accounts for that risk, Elena said, already turning the problem over in her mind. What if I told the village I was visiting distant relatives for a short while? It wouldn't be unusual, and it would explain my absence without raising immediate suspicion. And what excuse would explain my absence? Kale asked, a faint hint of dry humor returning to his voice for the first time in what felt like ages. The exiled Alpha doesn't typically announce his travel plans to anyone who might be watching. Then we don't announce anything, Elena said. We simply disappear quietly, together, and return before anyone notices we were gone longer than expected. 2 days later, under cover of early morning darkness, Elena and Kale set out toward the northern mountains, carrying minimal supplies to avoid drawing attention and moving carefully to avoid any patrols that might report their absence back to Damien. The journey proved every bit as challenging as Kale had warned. Steep, rocky paths gave way to dense forests unlike anything within their familiar territory, and twice they were forced to take shelter for hours while distant howls echoed through the mountains, warning of unfamiliar wolves who claimed this wild land as their own. On the third day of their journey, exhausted and running low on supplies, they finally reached a small settlement nestled within a hidden valley, populated by wolves who had fled various territories for reasons of their own, forming an unofficial community outside the boundaries of any established pack. Helena approached cautiously, asking careful questions about a man matching Corwin's description, while Kale remained watchful nearby, his newly strengthening senses alert for any sign of danger. It was an elderly woman tending a small garden near the edge of the settlement who finally provided the answer they had traveled so far to find. Corwin, she said, nodding slowly at the description Elena provided. Quiet fellow, keeps mostly to himself in a cabin near the eastern ridge, doesn't talk much about his past, but he's a good neighbor, always willing to help when someone's in need. Elena's heart pounded with a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation as the woman provided directions toward Corwin's isolated dwelling. When they finally arrived, a lean man with graying hair and cautious eyes stepped outside, his posture immediately defensive at the sight of unfamiliar visitors approaching his home. Corwin, Kale said quietly, stepping forward with his hands visible and open, a gesture of peace rather than threat. It's been a long time, my friend. Recognition dawned slowly across Corwin's weathered features, followed quickly by shock and disbelief. Kale? I never expected to see you again. I assumed after everything that happened, you were either dead or so thoroughly disgraced that you'd never dare show your face beyond your brother's territory. It's a long story, Kale said, one I'm hoping you can help me finally tell correctly, after all this time. Corwin studied them both carefully, before finally stepping aside, gesturing for them to enter his modest cabin. Once inside, seated around a small table, Elena watched as Kale carefully explained everything that had happened since Corwin's disappearance, the accusations, the exile, and their recent efforts to uncover the truth behind the events that had destroyed Kale's former life. I always suspected something like this might happen, Corwin said grimly, once Kale finished his explanation. I tried to warn you before everything unfolded, but I never imagined they would move so quickly, or that I would be forced to flee for my own safety before I could properly testify on your behalf. What exactly did you witness? Elena asked gently. We need to understand the full truth if we're ever going to clear Kale's name. Corwin took a deep breath before answering, memories clearly resurfacing that he had spent months trying to bury. I overheard a conversation between Damien's closest advisor, a wolf named Halric, and several disgruntled pack members who were planning the uprising. Halric was orchestrating the entire rebellion himself, using genuine grievances among the pack as cover for his true purpose, which was eliminating you as a potential rival to Damien's authority. He intended to let the uprising occur just enough to create chaos, then frame you for organizing it, ensuring Damien would have no choice but to exile or execute his own brother to maintain control. Elena's breath caught at the confirmation of what they had long suspected. And Halric threatened you into silence? He made it very clear what would happen if I spoke a single word of what I'd witnessed, Corwin said, his voice tight with old fear. I fled that same night, terrified for my own safety. I've regretted my silence every single day since, knowing the price you paid for my cowardice, Cale. You weren't a coward, Cale said firmly. You were a man facing an impossible choice against a powerful enemy. I don't blame you for surviving, Corwin, but I need your help now more than ever. Will you return with us, testify to what you witnessed, and help me finally reclaim the truth my brother stole from me? Corwin hesitated only a moment before nodding, determination replacing the fear that had governed his choices for so long. It's long past time I stopped running from this. You deserve justice, Cale, and I intend to help you find it, whatever the cost. As the three of them began preparing for the difficult journey back toward pack territory, Elena felt a fierce surge of hope rising within her chest, stronger than anything she had allowed herself to feel since this entire ordeal began. They finally had a witness, someone with direct knowledge of the true conspiracy that had destroyed Cale's life. The path ahead remained dangerous, uncertain, filled with the very real possibility that Damien and his advisor Halric would not surrender their carefully constructed lies without a fierce fight. But for the first time since Elena had arrived at that lonely eastern cabin, she believed with absolute certainty that justice was finally within reach, and that the broken man she had been ordered to marry was closer than ever to reclaiming the life and honor that had been so cruelly stolen from him. The return journey from the northern mountains felt entirely different from the anxious trip that had carried them there, where fear and uncertainty had once weighed heavily on every step. A cautious sense of purpose now guided their path homeward. Corwin walked alongside them, still visibly nervous about returning to territory he had fled in terror, yet resolute in his decision to finally speak the truth he had carried in silence for far too long. They moved carefully, avoiding the main paths that patrols typically monitored, choosing instead narrow trails through dense forest that added time to their journey but offered greater protection from prying eyes. Despite the added caution, Elena could not shake the persistent feeling that danger followed close behind them, a sensation that only grew stronger as they crossed back into familiar pack territory. On their second night back within the borders, camped in a hidden clearing far from any regular patrol routes, Elena woke suddenly to the snap of a branch somewhere beyond their small fire. Her eyes flew open, meeting Cale's already alert gaze across the dying embers. He had heard it too. "Someone's out there," Cale whispered, his hand moving instinctively toward Elena, positioning himself protectively between her and the darkness beyond their camp. Corwin scrambled upright, fear flooding back into his features as old instincts warned him of danger. If Halric's people found us, none of this will matter. He'll silence me permanently before I ever get the chance to speak. Cale's eyes scanned the darkness methodically, his newly reawakened senses stretching outward, searching for any sign of the threat lurking beyond the firelight. "Stay close to Elena," he murmured to Corwin. "Whatever happens, protect her." Before anyone could react further, three figures emerged from the shadows, moving with the disciplined precision of trained pack guards. Elena recognized one of them instantly as Garrick, his expression grim and purposeful as he stepped into the dim firelight. "I suspected you might return this way," Garrick said, his eyes flicking between Cale, Elena, and finally settling with dawning recognition on Corwin. "And I see you've brought quite the surprising companion." "Garrick," Cale said carefully, positioning himself protectively, without appearing overtly hostile. "This doesn't need to become a confrontation." "I'm afraid it already has," Garrick replied, though something in his tone carried less menace than Elena expected. "Halric has had watchers stationed throughout the territory for months, ever since rumors began circulating about renewed activity at your cabin. He suspected you might attempt something exactly like this. Elena's heart pounded with fear, certain they were about to face violence they had no way to survive against trained guards. But Garrick made no move toward aggression, instead studying the three of them with an expression Elena struggled to interpret. "I've served this pack faithfully for many years," Garrick continued, his voice lowering as though wary of being overheard by anyone beyond their small group. "But I've also watched Halrick's rise to power with growing unease. Too many convenient disappearances. Too many loyal wolves silenced or exiled without proper explanation. I begin to wonder whether the pack I've sworn to protect has been quietly corrupted from within." "Are you saying you believe us?" Elena asked cautiously, hardly daring to hope. "I'm saying I want to hear what this man has to say," Garrick replied, nodding toward Corwin. "If what you claim about Halrick's role in the original uprising proves true, it changes everything about the loyalty I've maintained toward this pack's current leadership." Corwin, despite his obvious fear, straightened his shoulders and met Garrick's gaze directly. "I witnessed Halrick planning the entire uprising himself, using it as a means to eliminate Kale as a rival to Damien's authority. I fled, because he threatened my life if I ever spoke the truth. I'm done running. Whatever the cost, I intend to make certain the truth finally comes to light." Garrick studied Corwin for a long, tense moment, before finally nodding slowly. "If your testimony holds up, and if I can gather additional evidence to support your claims, I may be willing to help you present this truth before the pack, properly and publicly, in a setting where Halrick cannot simply silence you the way he did before." "Why would you risk your own position to help us?" Kale asked carefully, still wary despite the unexpected offer. "Because I swore loyalty to this pack, not blind obedience to whichever wolf happens to hold the Alpha's ear," Garrick replied firmly. "If Halrick has been manipulating pack leadership for his own purposes, allowing that corruption to continue serves no one, least of all the innocent wolves who suffer under his influence." Over the following days, Garrick worked carefully behind the scenes, quietly gathering additional evidence to corroborate Corwin's testimony, while ensuring word of their activities did not reach Halrick prematurely. He identified several other pack members who had witnessed troubling incidents connected to Halrick's rise, wolves who had remained silent out of fear, but who, given the promise of protection and justice, proved willing to add their voices to the growing case against him. Meanwhile, Elena and Kale remained cautious, aware that even a single misstep could still unravel everything they had worked so hard to uncover. They returned quietly to their eastern cabin, maintaining the appearance of normal daily life, while Garrick continued his careful investigation within the village. One evening, as they sat together reviewing the mounting evidence Garrick had gathered, Elena noticed Kale studying her with an expression she hadn't quite seen from him before, something warmer and more open than the guarded caution that had once defined nearly every interaction between them. "What is it?" Elena asked, setting aside the documents she had been reviewing. "I've been thinking," Kale said quietly, "about everything that's happened since you first arrived at this cabin. I expected resentment. I expected another person forced into an arrangement neither of us wanted, someone who would resent me for the circumstances of our marriage, just as much as I initially resented having a wife forced upon me by my brother's cruelty. And instead," Elena prompted gently, "instead I found someone willing to risk everything to help me reclaim a life I had already accepted as lost forever," Kale continued, his voice carrying a rare vulnerability. "I don't know how to properly express what that means to me, Elena. You didn't have to involve yourself this deeply in my struggles. Yet you chose to anyway, again and again, at genuine risk to your own safety." Elena felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words, the culmination of weeks spent slowly building trust and understanding between two people who had begun their relationship under the most painful of circumstances. "I told you before, Kale, somewhere along the way, this stopped being about obligation for me. I care about what happens to you, about the life you deserve to reclaim." Kale reached across the small space between them, his hand gently cupping her cheek in a gesture far more intimate than anything they had shared before. "Whatever happens when we finally confront my brother and Halrick, I want you to know that having you beside me through all of this has meant more than I know how to properly express." The moment lingered between them, charged with an emotional intimacy that had grown steadily since their forced marriage began, transforming gradually from wary strangers bound by cruel circumstance into partners who had come to genuinely rely upon and care for one another. Their quiet moment was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door. Elena opened it to find Garrick standing outside, his expression tense with urgency. "We have enough evidence to move forward," Garrick said without preamble. "Multiple witnesses, corroborating testimony, and documentation connecting Halric directly to the original conspiracy. But we need to act soon. I've heard whispers that Halric may already suspect something is being planned against him. If we wait too long, he may find a way to silence our witnesses before we ever get the chance to present our case." Cale's expression hardened with renewed determination, the last traces of the broken, defeated man Elena had first met in this cabin, finally giving way entirely to someone ready to reclaim his rightful place. "Then we won't wait any longer," he said firmly. "It's time to bring this truth before the entire pack, whatever consequences may follow." Elena felt a fierce surge of pride and determination rising within her as she watched Cale step fully into the strength and conviction he had spent months rebuilding. Whatever dangers awaited them in the coming confrontation, she knew without doubt that the broken alpha the pack had once discarded was fully prepared to reclaim everything that had been so unjustly stolen from him, and she intended to stand firmly by his side throughout every moment of the battle still to come. Word of their planned confrontation could not remain hidden for long, and within 2 days, the consequences of their preparation arrived at the eastern cabin in the form of Damien himself, flanked by 4 heavily armed guards. Elena felt her blood run cold the moment she saw him approaching through the trees, his expression carrying none of the detached indifference she remembered from their previous encounters. This time, his eyes burned with genuine fury. "I've heard troubling rumors," Damien said, his voice dangerously calm as he stopped just short of the cabin's small clearing. "Rumors about secret meetings, about witnesses being gathered, about accusations against one of my most trusted advisors. Care to explain what exactly has been happening out here, brother?" Cale stepped forward, positioning himself protectively between Damien and Elena, his posture radiating a confidence and strength that had been entirely absent during their first encounter months earlier. "The truth is finally coming to light, Damien. Halric orchestrated the uprising that destroyed my life. He used it to eliminate me as a perceived threat to your authority, and he's been manipulating your leadership from the shadows ever since." Damien's expression flickered with something Elena couldn't quite identify, doubt perhaps, or carefully suppressed fear. "These are serious accusations against a wolf who has served this pack faithfully for years." "Then let the evidence speak for itself," Elena said, stepping forward despite the guard's obvious tension at her boldness. "We have witnesses, Alpha, people willing to testify to what they saw, what they experienced under Halric's manipulation. All we ask is a fair hearing before the pack, the same fairness that was denied to Cale during his original trial." For a long, tense moment, Damien said nothing, his gaze shifting between his brother and the woman he had once dismissed as merely a means of settling an old debt. Something in Elena's fierce determination, in Cale's newfound strength and conviction, seemed to give him pause. "If what you claim proves false," Damien finally said, his voice carrying a warning edge, "the consequences will fall upon both of you, severely." "We accept that risk," Cale said without hesitation, "because we know the truth will hold, whatever challenges you throw against it." Damien studied his brother for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes before he finally nodded, sharp and reluctant. "3 days from now, at the Great Hall, I'll allow this hearing, though I warn you both, if this proves to be some elaborate deception, I won't hesitate to deal with you accordingly." As Damien and his guards departed, disappearing back into the forest, Elena finally released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That was more terrifying than I expected," she admitted, her hands trembling slightly with the aftermath of tension. "But it worked," Cale said, a rare, genuine smile finally breaking through his usually guarded expression. "We have our hearing, Elena. 3 days to prepare everything, to ensure Halric cannot find any way to undermine our case, before the truth finally comes before the entire pack." The following days passed in a blur of careful preparation. Garrick worked tirelessly, ensuring the witnesses he had gathered remained protected and ready to testify, while Corwin steadied his resolve for the difficult task of publicly confronting the man who had once threatened his life into years of hiding. Elena helped organize the evidence methodically, ensuring every document, every testimony, would present a clear and undeniable picture of the conspiracy that had destroyed Cale's former life. Cale, meanwhile, continued strengthening his connection to his wolf with renewed intensity, understanding that whatever happened during the hearing, he needed to be fully prepared, both mentally and physically, for whatever confrontation might follow. Elena watched him train each morning with growing admiration, marveling at the transformation that had occurred since her arrival at this cabin months earlier. The broken, defeated man she had first met had been replaced by someone radiating quiet, confident strength, someone who once again looked every bit the capable leader he had been born to become. On the evening before the hearing, as they sat together reviewing their final preparations, Elena noticed Cale's hands trembling slightly, betraying nerves he had worked hard to hide throughout their weeks of preparation. "Are you afraid?" she asked gently, reaching over to still his restless hands with her own. "Terrified," Cale admitted honestly, something in his tone suggesting relief at finally voicing the fear he had carried silently. "Not of Halric, not even of my brother's judgment. I'm afraid of losing this chance, Elena. After everything we've worked toward, after everything you've sacrificed to help me reach this point, I'm terrified that somehow it still won't be enough." "It will be enough," Elena said firmly, meeting his eyes with unwavering conviction. "Because the truth is on our side, Cale. Whatever Halric attempts tomorrow, whatever lies he tries to construct, the evidence we've gathered, the witnesses willing to speak, all of it points toward one undeniable conclusion. You were innocent from the very beginning." Cale reached up, gently cupping her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that spoke of emotions neither of them had fully acknowledged aloud until this moment. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know something, Elena. These past months with you have given me back far more than just my strength or my wolf. You've given me back my belief that justice still exists in this world, that I'm still worthy of the life I once had, and perhaps something even greater than that." "Cale," Elena whispered, her heart pounding at the raw honesty in his voice. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of everything they had endured together since that first painful day of their forced marriage. Not out of obligation, not because circumstances forced us together, but because you've become the truest partner I could have ever hoped to find, especially during the darkest chapter of my life. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion in his words. "I love you too," she said softly. "I think I have for longer than I realized, watching you rebuild yourself these past months, watching you fight so hard to reclaim the honor that was stolen from you." Their lips met in a gentle, tender kiss, one that carried none of the awkward distance that had once defined their relationship, replaced entirely by genuine affection and hard-won trust. When they finally parted, Cale rested his forehead gently against hers, both of them drawing strength from the connection they had built together against overwhelming odds. "Tomorrow we face them together," Cale said quietly. "Whatever happens, whatever Halric or my brother attempts, we face it as true partners, standing united." "Together," Elena agreed, her voice steady despite the uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring. "Whatever it takes, we'll see this through to the end." As they finally settled in for what little rest they could manage before the crucial hearing, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection on everything that had changed since her arrival at this isolated cabin. She had come here expecting punishment, expecting a life defined by obligation and quiet suffering beside a man the entire pack had discarded as dangerous and broken beyond repair. Instead, she had found genuine love, a partner worthy of every risk and sacrifice she had made along the way, and a shared purpose that had transformed both their lives in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Tomorrow would bring the ultimate test of everything they had built together, a confrontation that would determine not only Cale's future, but the future of the entire pack itself. But as Elena drifted toward sleep, wrapped securely in Cale's protective embrace, she felt certain, more certain than she had ever felt about anything in her life, that whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together, and together, they would prevail. The great hall had never felt so crowded, nor so tense, as it did the following morning, when Elena and Kale arrived alongside Garrick, Corwin, and the small group of witnesses who had finally found the courage to speak against the corruption that had poisoned the pack's leadership for far too long. Word of the hearing had spread quickly throughout the village overnight, and curious, anxious pack members filled every available space along the walls, whispering among themselves as they watched the exiled Alpha walk through their midst with a confidence none of them had witnessed from him in over a year. Damien sat upon his raised chair at the far end of the hall, his expression carefully composed, though Elena noticed the slight tension in his shoulders that betrayed genuine uncertainty about what the coming hours might reveal. Beside him stood Halric, tall and composed, his sharp eyes calculating as he studied the gathered witnesses with barely concealed contempt. "Let the record show," Halric said smoothly, stepping forward before anyone else could speak, "that this entire hearing stems from baseless accusations made by a disgraced Alpha, desperate to reclaim standing he lost through his own treachery, and a foolish woman who has clearly fallen victim to his manipulation." Elena felt anger flare within her at his dismissive words, but she held her tongue, trusting the evidence they had carefully gathered to speak far louder than any emotional outburst could manage. "The pack will hear the evidence first," Damien said firmly, silencing Halric's attempt to control the narrative before it even properly began. "Then, and only then, will judgment be rendered." Garrick stepped forward first, his voice carrying clearly throughout the silent hall, as he detailed his own suspicions regarding Halric's activities over the past year, the pattern of convenient disappearances, silenced witnesses, and consolidated power that had grown increasingly troubling the longer he served under Halric's influence. Several other witnesses followed, each adding their own testimony, small pieces of a larger picture that painted an increasingly damning portrait of manipulation and deceit. Finally, Corwin stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly, despite the months of resolve he had built toward this exact moment. "I witnessed Halric planning the entire uprising himself," Corwin said, his voice growing steadier with each word. "He used genuine grievances among certain pack members as cover for his true purpose, eliminating Kale as a perceived threat to Damien's authority. When I attempted to warn Kale of what was coming, Halric discovered my intentions and threatened my life if I ever spoke the truth. I fled that same night, and I've lived in hiding ever since, until Kale and Elena found me and gave me the courage to finally return." A wave of stunned murmurs swept through the gathered crowd, disbelief mixing with growing outrage, as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Halric's composed expression finally cracked, fury flashing briefly across his features before he forced himself back under control. "Lies," Halric spat, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "This man disappeared for over a year, and now conveniently returns with a fabricated story designed to protect his old friend from justice he rightfully earned. Then explain the documented pattern of unexplained disappearances among wolves who questioned your growing influence," Elena said, finally stepping forward herself, her voice steady despite the weight of every eye in the hall settling upon her. "Explain why so many witnesses, independently, describe the same troubling pattern of manipulation and threats. The truth doesn't require this many separate voices to fabricate itself, Halric. It simply requires enough people finally finding the courage to speak it." Damien's gaze shifted toward his advisor, something shifting behind his eyes as the weight of accumulated evidence finally began overwhelming his willingness to dismiss the accusations entirely. "Halric," he said slowly, "these are serious claims, corroborated by multiple independent witnesses. I require a satisfactory explanation, and I require it now." For the first time since Elena had known of him, Halric's composed mask fully shattered, revealing the desperate calculation of a man who understood his carefully constructed position was collapsing beneath him. "Everything I did," he said, his voice turning venomous, "I did to protect this pack from a leader too weak to hold power against genuine threats. Kale was always the greater danger. Damien, I simply ensured the pack chose the stronger brother to lead them." The confession, delivered in a moment of desperate arrogance, sealed his fate more thoroughly than any evidence Elena and Kale had gathered. Gasps echoed throughout the hall, as Halric's own words confirmed everything they had worked so hard to prove. "You manipulated an uprising, framed my own brother for treachery he never committed, and threatened innocent witnesses into years of hiding, Damien said, his voice cold with a fury Elena had never witnessed from him before. All to serve your own ambitions disguised as loyalty to this pack. I did what needed to be done, Halric said, though desperation had replaced his earlier confidence entirely. Kale would have challenged your leadership eventually. I simply removed that threat before it could ever materialize. That was never your decision to make, Damien said, rising slowly from his chair, his authority radiating with renewed conviction, now that the truth had finally been laid bare before the entire pack. You manipulated me, Halric. You used my own insecurities as a new alpha against my brother, against this entire pack. For that betrayal, there can be only one answer under our laws. Halric's guards, sensing the shift in loyalty now sweeping through the hall, quickly stepped back from his side, unwilling to align themselves further with a wolf whose treachery had just been exposed before the entire community. Halric stood alone, finally facing the consequences of the corruption he had spent years carefully constructing. Halric, Damien announced, his voice carrying clearly throughout the silent hall, you are hereby stripped of your position and exiled from this territory, effective immediately. Should you ever return, you will face judgment far harsher than mere exile. Guards moved forward to escort the disgraced advisor from the hall, his protests falling on ears that had finally heard the truth too clearly to be swayed by any further manipulation. As Halric disappeared from view, a heavy silence settled over the gathered crowd, broken finally by Damien turning toward his brother with an expression Elena had never before witnessed upon his face, something resembling genuine regret. Kale, Damien said quietly, though his voice still carried throughout the hall, I owe you an apology far greater than words can properly convey. I allowed my own insecurities, my own fears about maintaining power, to be manipulated against you. I stripped you of everything, exiled my own brother, based on lies I should have investigated more carefully before rendering judgment. Kale studied his brother for a long-waited moment, the pain of the past year clearly still present within him, though tempered now by the vindication finally offered through this public reckoning. You allowed Halric to convince you that eliminating me was necessary to secure your own authority, Kale said. That doesn't erase the year I lost, the suffering Elena and I endured to uncover this truth ourselves, without any support from the brother who should have protected me. You're right, Damien acknowledged, humility replacing his usual composed authority. I cannot undo the harm already caused, but I can, and will, formally restore your title, your rank, and your rightful place within this pack, effective immediately. A ripple of surprised murmurs swept through the crowd at this announcement, though Elena noticed many faces reflecting genuine relief rather than shock, as if the pack itself had long sensed something wrong with the story they had been told about Kale's supposed betrayal. That's not enough, Kale said, his voice carrying a new authority that silenced the murmuring crowd instantly. This pack deserves leadership that earns trust through demonstrated integrity, not leadership secured through manipulation, fear, or convenient lies. I invoke the ancient right of formal challenge, Damien. Let the pack witness a fair contest, wolf to wolf, to determine who truly deserves to lead them moving forward. Silence fell across the hall as the weight of Kale's challenge settled over everyone present. Damien's expression flickered through several emotions, surprise, apprehension, and finally something resembling acceptance, understanding that after everything that had transpired, a formal challenge represented the only truly fair way to settle the matter definitively before the entire pack. Very well, Damien said finally, his voice steady despite the obvious weight of the decision. The challenge will take place 3 days from now, witnessed by the entire pack, settled according to our most ancient and sacred traditions. As the hall slowly began emptying, pack members whispering excitedly among themselves about the unprecedented events they had just witnessed, Elena felt Kale's hand find hers, gripping tightly with a mixture of determination and lingering uncertainty about the challenge still to come. Are you certain about this? Elena asked quietly, once they had stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. You've already reclaimed your title, your innocence. You don't need to risk everything further through a formal challenge. I need the pack to see, beyond any doubt, that leadership earned through strength and integrity means something different than leadership secured through manipulation and fear, Kale said firmly. This isn't about revenge against my brother, Elena. It's about proving, once and for all, that I'm truly worthy of whatever role I ultimately choose to accept within this pack's future. Elena squeezed his hand reassuringly, pride swelling within her chest at the strength and conviction radiating from the man beside her, so different from the broken, defeated figure she had first encountered months earlier in that isolated eastern cabin. Then we prepare for this challenge together, she said firmly, just as we've faced everything else these past months. Kale pulled her close, pressing a gentle kiss against her forehead as the setting sun cast long shadows across the village around them. Together, he agreed. Whatever the outcome, we face it as true partners, standing united against whatever challenges still remain ahead. The 3 days leading up to the formal challenge passed with an unbearable tension that settled over the entire pack territory. Word of the upcoming contest between the two brothers had spread far beyond the village itself, drawing curious wolves from neighboring territories, eager to witness what promised to be a historic confrontation. Elena spent those final days helping Kale prepare, though she understood there was little more she could offer beyond her steady presence and unwavering support. You've already proven your strength, Elena said, watching Kale move through his final training exercises in the clearing behind their cabin. Whatever happens during the challenge itself, nothing can diminish what you've already accomplished these past months. I appreciate that, Kale said, pausing to catch his breath, sweat glistening across his brow despite the cool morning air. But Damien has held his position for over a year now, commanding the full strength of an alpha whose authority was never truly challenged until this moment. I cannot afford to underestimate him, regardless of the corruption that once influenced his judgment. Elena understood his caution, having witnessed firsthand the genuine power Damien commanded during their initial encounter months earlier. Yet she also recognized something in Kale that had not existed during those early days of their forced marriage, a quiet, unshakable confidence born from reclaiming his connection to his wolf and rebuilding his physical and emotional strength through months of dedicated effort. On the morning of the challenge, the entire village gathered at the edge of the training grounds, a wide circle marked by ancient stones that had witnessed countless similar contests throughout the pack's long history. Elena stood near the front of the crowd alongside Garrick and Corwin, her heart pounding with a mixture of pride and fear as she watched Kale prepare himself at one edge of the circle, while Damien took his position at the opposite end. The rules are simple, announced an elderly wolf named Aldrich, chosen to oversee the contest due to his neutral standing within the pack's hierarchy. This challenge will be settled through controlled combat, ending the moment one combatant yields or proves unable to continue. No lasting harm is intended here, only a clear demonstration of strength and worthiness to lead. Both brothers nodded their understanding, their eyes locked across the circle, with an intensity that spoke of far more than simple competition. This confrontation represented the culmination of everything that had transpired between them, years of complicated brotherhood, twisted by manipulation, betrayal, and finally, hard-won redemption. Begin, Aldrich announced, stepping back from the circle's edge. The brothers moved simultaneously, closing the distance between them with a speed and precision that spoke of their shared heritage as powerful alphas. Elena watched, her breath catching as Kale and Damien exchanged a rapid series of strikes and counters, each testing the other's defenses, searching for weaknesses that might provide an opening. Damien struck first with genuine force, a powerful blow that Kale barely managed to deflect, stumbling slightly from the impact. The crowd murmured with anticipation as Damien pressed his advantage, clearly determined to end the contest quickly through sheer aggressive power. But Kale, drawing upon months of careful training and the newly strengthened connection to his wolf, recovered swiftly, meeting Damien's next strike with equal force. The two brothers exchanged blow after blow, their movements growing increasingly fierce and calculated as the contest wore on, neither willing to yield ground easily. Elena's heart pounded with every exchange, watching as Kale's confidence and skill grew visibly stronger with each passing moment. The broken man who had once doubted his own worth, now fighting with the full conviction of someone who genuinely believed in his right to reclaim his rightful place. Damien, though skilled and determined, seemed increasingly unable to match the sheer resolve now driving his brother forward. Midway through the contest, Damien attempted a powerful strike aimed at ending things decisively, but Kale anticipated the movement, sidestepping with fluid grace before countering with a decisive blow of his own that sent Damien stumbling backward, momentarily off balance. The crowd gasped collectively, sensing the shifting tide of the confrontation. Damien recovered quickly, but something had changed in his expression, a flicker of genuine respect mixing with his determination to continue fighting. "You've grown stronger," he said, breathing heavily as they circled each other warily. "I had good reason to," Cale replied, his own breathing controlled, despite the intensity of their exchange. "Everything you took from me forced me to rediscover strength I didn't know I still possessed." The final exchange came swiftly, both brothers moving with everything they had left, until Cale finally found the opening he had been searching for, sweeping Damien's legs from beneath him and pinning him firmly to the ground, his position leaving no doubt about the contest's outcome. For a long, tense moment, silence gripped the entire crowd, as everyone waited to see how this pivotal confrontation would finally resolve. Damien, pinned and clearly defeated, met his brother's eyes with an expression that carried genuine acceptance rather than resentment. "I yield," Damien said clearly, his voice carrying throughout the silent training grounds. "The victory is yours, Cale, fairly earned." Cale released his brother slowly, extending a hand to help him rise from the ground, a gesture that spoke volumes about the genuine reconciliation beginning to form between them, despite everything that had transpired. The crowd erupted into stunned applause and excited murmuring, witnessing not just the outcome of a formal challenge, but the beginning of what promised to be a significant shift in their pack's future leadership. Aldrich stepped forward, raising his voice to address the gathered crowd. "By ancient right and fair contest, witnessed by this entire pack, Cale has proven himself the rightful leader of this territory. Let it be known throughout our lands that leadership here will once again be determined by genuine strength, integrity, and the will of a pack that deserves honest guidance." Elena rushed forward the moment the formal proceedings concluded, unable to contain her joy and pride any longer. Cale caught her easily as she reached him, lifting her briefly off her feet in a fierce embrace that spoke of everything they had endured together to reach this triumphant moment. "You did it," Elena whispered against his shoulder, tears of relief and happiness gathering in her eyes. "After everything, you finally reclaimed everything that was stolen from you." "We did it," Cale corrected gently, pulling back just enough to meet her eyes with an expression of profound gratitude and love. "None of this would have been possible without you, Elena. Your faith in me, your willingness to fight alongside me even when I had lost faith in myself. This victory belongs to both of us equally." As the celebration began spreading throughout the gathered crowd, pack members approaching to offer their congratulations and renewed loyalty to their newly confirmed leader, Damien approached the couple, his expression carrying a humility that had been entirely absent during their earliest encounters. "I know words cannot fully repair the harm I caused you both," Damien said quietly, "but I intend to spend whatever time remains to me, making amends, supporting your leadership however I can, and ensuring this pack never again falls victim to the kind of manipulation that nearly destroyed everything we hold dear." Cale studied his brother for a long moment before finally extending his hand, a gesture of reconciliation that carried genuine weight after everything they had both endured. "The past cannot be undone," Cale said, "but the future remains unwritten. I would welcome your support, Damien, as we work together to rebuild trust and strength within this pack." Damien accepted the offered hand firmly, relief and gratitude evident in his expression, as the brothers finally began the long process of healing the deep wounds their fractured relationship had endured. Around them, the pack continued celebrating, the weight of corruption and injustice finally lifting from a community that had suffered under its influence for far too long. Elena watched the scene unfold with profound satisfaction, understanding that this moment represented far more than simply a personal victory for the man she loved. It represented the restoration of genuine justice, the triumph of truth over manipulation, and the beginning of a new chapter for an entire pack that deserved leadership built on integrity rather than fear and deception. Months passed following the historic challenge that restored Cale to his rightful place as leader of the pack, and the territory that had once suffered under the shadow of corruption and manipulation began flourishing under the guidance of a leadership built on genuine integrity and hard-won wisdom. Elena watched with quiet pride as Kale settled into his role, drawing upon everything he had learned during his difficult exile to govern, with a fairness and compassion that quickly earned him the deep respect and loyalty of every pack member. The great hall that had once witnessed her painful sentencing to a marriage of obligation now served as the setting for gatherings filled with genuine warmth and community spirit. Elena often found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. From that terrifying moment when Damien had announced her forced marriage to a supposedly ruined alpha, through months of careful investigation and dangerous confrontation, to finally standing beside Kale as his equal partner in leading their thriving pack. One crisp autumn morning, Elena found Kale standing at the edge of their now expanded territory, gazing out over land that had grown more prosperous under his careful stewardship. New alliances had formed with neighboring packs who had heard of the corruption exposed, and justice ultimately served within their community. Trade had flourished, bringing renewed prosperity to villagers who had struggled under the previous administration's neglect and hidden manipulation. "You look thoughtful this morning," Elena said, approaching to stand beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist as she gazed out over the same view. "I was thinking about everything that's changed since that first terrible day in the Great Hall," Kale admitted, pulling her closer against his side. "I remember feeling as though my entire world had ended when Damien sentenced me to that isolated cabin, when I believed I had lost everything worth living for. Now, standing here with you, watching this pack flourish under leadership built on the truth we fought so hard to reclaim, I can hardly recognize that broken man I once was." "You were never truly broken," Elena said softly, "just temporarily buried beneath circumstances designed to keep you from reclaiming your genuine strength. I simply helped you remember who you truly were all along." Kale turned to face her fully, his expression carrying the same warmth and devotion that had grown steadily between them since those early, uncertain days of their forced marriage. "You did far more than simply help me remember, Elena. You gave me a reason to fight for something beyond mere survival. You gave me hope when I had none remaining, and you stood beside me through every danger and uncertainty until we finally reclaimed everything that mattered most." Their pack had transformed significantly under Kale's leadership, welcoming back many wolves who had fled during the previous administration's troubled years, including Toby, the young Omega they had rescued early in their journey together, who had grown into a confident and valued member of their expanding community. Corwin had settled permanently within the territory, finally free from the fear that had driven him into years of hiding, serving now as one of Kale's most trusted advisors. Even Garrick had earned a position of significant respect, his willingness to question corrupted authority, ultimately proving instrumental in restoring genuine justice to their pack. Damien, too, had found his own path toward redemption, working diligently alongside his brother to rebuild the trust their fractured relationship had once threatened to destroy permanently. Though he no longer held the position of ultimate authority, he had discovered genuine purpose in supporting Kale's leadership, using his experience to help guide difficult decisions, while finally understanding the true weight and responsibility that came with genuine leadership built on integrity rather than fear. That evening, as the pack gathered for a celebration marking the anniversary of Kale's restoration to leadership, Elena stood beside him before the assembled community, watching as pack members shared stories, laughter, and genuine warmth that had been notably absent during the darker years of corrupted leadership. Children played freely throughout the gathering, their carefree joy a testament to the safety and prosperity their community now enjoyed. "I have an announcement," Kale said, raising his voice to address the gathered crowd, drawing Elena close against his side. "1 year ago, I stood in this very hall, having just reclaimed a life and title I once believed lost forever. But the truth is, none of that victory would have been possible without the woman standing beside me today, who was ordered into a marriage neither of us wanted, yet who chose, again and again, to fight for truth, for justice, and for a future neither of us could have imagined when we first met." The crowd fell into respectful silence, watching as Kale turned to face Elena directly, his expression filled with genuine love and gratitude that had only deepened throughout their remarkable journey together. "Elena," Kale continued, "you transformed what began as an arrangement of obligation into the greatest partnership I could have ever hoped to find. You believed in me when I had lost all belief in myself. You risked everything to help me reclaim the truth that had been stolen from me. And through every challenge we faced together, you never once wavered in your commitment to justice, to integrity, and to the future we've built together. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes as the weight of his words, and the incredible journey they represented, settled fully upon her. We built this future together, she said softly, her voice carrying clearly throughout the silent hall. Every step of this journey, from that first frightening day to this moment now, we faced side by side, as true equals and partners. The pack erupted into warm applause, celebrating not just their leader's remarkable journey from exile to restoration, but the genuine love story that had unfolded alongside his pursuit of justice. A story that had ultimately transformed an entire community for the better. As the celebration continued late into the evening, Elena found a quiet moment to step outside, gazing up at the star-filled sky above their thriving territory. Kale soon joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, as they both took in the peaceful beauty of the night. "Do you ever think about how different everything could have been?" Elena asked quietly. "If Damien had never issued that terrible order, if I had never come to that isolated cabin, if we had never chosen to fight for the truth together." "I try not to dwell on paths we didn't take," Kale said softly, resting his chin gently against the top of her head. "I prefer instead to appreciate exactly where we've arrived, together, through every difficult choice and dangerous challenge we faced along this journey. What began as an order neither of us wanted became the foundation for everything genuinely good in my life." Elena turned within his embrace, meeting his eyes with all the love and devotion that had grown steadily between them since those uncertain early days. "I feel exactly the same way," she said softly. "A broken alpha and an ordinary pack member, forced together by circumstances designed to punish us both, instead found something far greater than either of us could have imagined. We found genuine love, unshakable partnership, and the strength to reclaim justice, not just for ourselves, but for our entire community." Kale leaned down, pressing a gentle, loving kiss against her lips, sealing the promise of everything they had built together, and everything still waiting ahead of them in their shared future. "Whatever challenges the future may still bring," he said softly, "I know we'll face them exactly as we've faced everything else, together, as true partners, unshakable in our commitment to each other and to the community we've worked so hard to rebuild." As they stood together beneath the star-filled sky, surrounded by the warmth and celebration of the community they had helped restore to genuine justice and prosperity, Elena reflected on the extraordinary journey that had transformed a forced marriage born from cruelty into a genuine partnership built on love, respect, and shared triumph over overwhelming adversity. The broken alpha the pack had once discarded had reclaimed not only his rightful title, but his genuine strength, his honor, and his heart, becoming a true king not through the power of his position, but through the depth of his integrity. And Elena knew, without any doubt, that whatever the future held, they would continue building it together, side by side, exactly as true partners always should.